What kind of man sits there silently while his wife makes jokes about fidelity being boring, only to later reveal he has been gathering proof against her all along? Mine does. I am Evadne Rowe, 33 years old, and I used to think I was untouchable. I thought my sharp tongue and bold words made me the one in charge. At family dinners and nights out with friends, I liked to say things that shocked people, little comments about how no one was really faithful anymore, about how marriage was just routine. People laughed, some nervously, some too loudly, and I fed on that laughter. My husband Theodore, 36, never challenged me in public. He would sit there, calm and quiet, looking down at his plate or his glass, while I made him the butt of my jokes. I told myself his silence meant I had won, that he was too dull and too weak to ever fight me. I worked as a receptionist in a law office, which gave me plenty of time to talk, gossip, and soak up attention from co-workers and even clients like Adrian, the trainer who flirted shamelessly and made me feel alive in ways Theodore never did. We had 2 children, Emily, who is 9, and Noah, who is 6, and I told myself I was still a good mother because I came home at night and kept the house running. My sister Marla encouraged me at first, saying I was only speaking truths other women were too afraid to admit, while my mother-in-law Karen watched me with eyes full of judgment and pity. I brushed off her warnings, telling myself she was just old-fashioned. What I didn't realize was that Theodore wasn't weak at all. His silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Every time I laughed at his expense, he was collecting it, building something steady and strong, while I thought I was in control. It started at a family dinner, one of those evenings where the table was heavy with food and conversation, and I decided to put myself at the center. I liked being the one people turned to, the one who could make them laugh by saying what others only thought. Theodore sat beside me, as calm as ever, while I leaned into my role. I told everyone fidelity was boring, that marriage worked better when people admitted they needed more. Some laughed loudly, others smiled tightly, and a few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Theodore stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his glass. I told myself that his quietness made me stronger, that I could say anything without fear of consequence. The thrill of controlling the room was worth more to me than his dignity. Later that night at home, I noticed him sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook. He wrote something down without looking up when I asked him about it. He said it was a reminder, and I rolled my eyes. I thought he was being petty, maybe tracking chores, or money like he always did. I didn't realize he was recording my words, capturing the very sentences I had carelessly thrown around in front of family. To me, it was nothing. To him, it was evidence. At work, I slipped into the easy attention of Adrian, the trainer who always made me feel younger and more exciting than Theodore ever had. He flirted when he came in, told me I deserved more than a quiet man who spent evenings with spreadsheets, and I let those words sink into me like validation. I stayed late at the office sometimes, laughing with co-workers or sending messages to Adrian, and when Theodore asked why, I told him I was catching up on tasks. When he pressed, I accused him of being paranoid. I told him if he trusted me, he wouldn't ask so many questions. He didn't argue. He just nodded and went quiet, and I believed that meant I had won again. Marla, my sister, cheered me on in those days. When I told her about Theodore asking where I had been, she laughed and said, men only acted jealous when they couldn't keep up. She told me I deserved fun and freedom, that I shouldn't apologize for wanting more than routine. Her support fed my arrogance, and I repeated her words to myself whenever Theodore's calmness unsettled me. But not everyone reacted the same way. Karen, my mother-in-law, caught me alone one afternoon and told me I was playing with fire. She said Theodore was stronger than I gave him credit for. I laughed at her, called her old-fashioned, and told her fidelity was a myth anyway. She shook her head and walked away. But the way she looked at Theodore later that day told me she believed in him more than I did. The next big moment came at a restaurant with friends. The table was full of drinks and chatter, and I leaned forward with a smile that demanded attention. I repeated my line about fidelity being boring, adding that only insecure people clung to it. Some of my friends laughed nervously, others avoided eye contact. Theodore didn't respond at all. He set down his napkin, stood, and walked out without a word. The silence he left behind was heavier than the laughter that followed me. I tried to cover it by telling the group he had no sense of humor, but I could feel the air had shifted. People were no longer laughing with me. They were embarrassed for me. When I got home, I tried to swipe my card for groceries and found it declined. I thought it was a mistake until I checked my phone and saw alerts about changes to our accounts. Theodore had reorganized the finances quietly, cutting me off from what I thought was mine. I stormed into the house, demanding to know what he had done, and he said simply that things needed order. I called him controlling, said he was punishing me for being modern, but he didn't rise to the bait. He just went back to his notebook, his pen scratching steadily against the page while I fumed. Adrian told me later that Theodore was trying to scare me, that I should ignore him and focus on myself. He said men like Theodore always broke when pushed. I wanted to believe that, but even Adrian started answering my messages later and cancelling plans more often. He liked the thrill, but not the consequences, and I began to realize he would never stand by me if things got worse. The children noticed the cracks more than I admitted. Emily asked me why Daddy didn't sleep in the same bed anymore, and Noah clung to Theodore's hand tighter each time they walked together. I told them Daddy was just tired, but their faces told me they didn't believe it. Late at night, lying in bed alone, I heard the sound of Theodore's keyboard clicking in the study. I imagined spreadsheets and numbers, but another thought crept in, that he was building something against me. I pushed it down, telling myself he was too dull for that, too careful, but each night, the sound of his steady typing felt less like work and more like a plan. His silence no longer looked like weakness. It looked like strength I had never seen before, and that strength unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. Adrian's attention was supposed to keep me steady, but even that began to slip. He told me not to worry about Theodore, that my husband was only bluffing with his calmness, but I could see Adrian pulling back. He replied later to my messages, kept conversations shorter, and made excuses about his schedule. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had other people who believed me, but the truth was that my circle was shrinking. The laughter I once relied on was thinning out, and even my sister Marla's voice sounded less confident when she told me I was right to live freely. She said maybe I should ease up, that the jokes were cutting deeper than I realized, and for the first time, she didn't sound like my ally. The real shift came at a family barbecue. The yard was filled with cousins, siblings, and neighbors, and I was in my element, drink in hand, telling stories and making jokes. I slipped in another one of my usual lines, saying Fidelity was boring and that only people with nothing else going on clung to it. Some people laughed politely, others looked down at their plates. Theodore didn't say a word. He set his drink on the table, gathered the children, and quietly left the yard. No anger, no argument, no scene, just his steady retreat. I brushed it off with a laugh, telling everyone he was humorless, but I noticed the looks people exchanged. They weren't laughing at him. They were pitying him and judging me. Later that night, I went into the study to find him. He was at his laptop again, papers spread around him in neat piles. I demanded to know why he had left the barbecue so suddenly, and he said he had more important things to do. I accused him of sulking, of trying to punish me with silence, but he didn't rise to it. He just went back to his typing, and that calmness rattled me. It was worse than a fight I could win with sharper words. Silence gave me nothing to twist. The next day, I found a small folder on the counter with my name written on it. Inside were copies of receipts, screenshots of messages, and even a printout of a photo of me at the clinic laughing with Adrian. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was empty bluffing. I told Theodore he was wasting his time collecting meaningless scraps. He said nothing, only glanced at me before walking away. That glance shook me more than I wanted to admit. By then, even my friends had started to distance themselves. Invitations grew fewer, and when I did see them, their laughter at my jokes felt strained. One of them even told me quietly that maybe I should think about how Theodore felt, that I was going too far. I lashed out, saying they were taking his side, but deep down I knew what was happening. The stage I had built for myself was collapsing, and the audience was slipping away. The children noticed the tension more than anyone. Emily started asking questions I couldn't answer. She wanted to know why Daddy kept files in his bag, why he didn't come to bed, why he was always meeting with people she didn't recognize. Noah asked why Daddy was serious all the time. I told them their father was just busy with work, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They clung to him tighter every day, while they looked at me with questions I couldn't spin into jokes. One night, I confronted Theodore directly. I asked him why he was building a case against me, why he was turning our life into paperwork. He said calmly that he needed protection, for himself and for the children. I shouted that I was the victim, that he was the one trying to control me. He didn't shout back. He didn't even frown. He just kept sorting through his papers, as if my anger was nothing more than background noise. That was when I finally understood. He had moved past me. He wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. He was preparing to end the whole performance. Adrian disappeared soon after. He stopped answering calls completely, leaving me alone to face the fallout. Without him, without Marla's full support, without my friend's laughter, I was left with only Theodore's silence. And that silence was louder than anything I had ever said. I had built my identity on mocking Fidelity, on making him look small, but he had been building something stronger in the background. A record, a strategy, a case that would make me the small one, and there was nothing left I could do to stop it. The morning it became undeniable started with another envelope. This one wasn't left casually on the counter. It was delivered by hand, a knock at the door followed by a stranger in a suit asking for me. My heart raced as I took it, already guessing what was inside. I tore it open at the kitchen table and found legal papers, full of words I had never expected to see attached to my name. There were requests for custody arrangements, financial protections, even temporary restrictions on accounts I had always assumed would be mine to use freely. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page, each one stamped and signed. Theodore had gone from silent to official, and I realized he hadn't been bluffing at all. I stormed into the study where he was sitting calmly, his laptop open and files stacked neatly at his side. I demanded to know how he could betray me like this. He said simply that he wasn't betraying me. He was protecting himself and the children. I shouted that I was the one being punished, that I was being made into the villain just for telling the truth about how I felt. He didn't argue. He didn't even raise his voice. He said the evidence would speak for itself. I hated the way he said it, calm, steady, certain, as if my words no longer mattered. I tried to rally support after that. I called friends, told them Theodore was controlling, that he was trying to silence me. But they had already seen too much. Some didn't answer at all, and those who did gave me short, careful responses. One even told me Theodore had already spoken to them, shown them proof of my behavior, and that they couldn't stand in the middle. I realized then that the circle I had always relied on for laughter and validation had turned their backs. Even Marla, my own sister, began to pull away. She told me she loved me, but couldn't defend what I was doing. She said she had seen the way I mocked Theodore in front of the children, the way Emily's eyes filled with confusion, and Noah clung to his father's hand. She said she couldn't pretend that was harmless anymore. I told her she was choosing his side over mine, but her silence after my words said everything. Karen, of course, wasted no time making her stance clear. She visited often, her voice louder now that Theodore had taken action. She said her son had always been stronger than I gave him credit for. She told me I had mistaken his quietness for weakness, and now I was learning the difference. I tried to laugh in her face, to dismiss her as bitter and old-fashioned, but the truth was her words stung. She had been right all along. At the clinic, the fallout reached me too. Co-workers whispered in corners, their eyes flicking toward me before they quickly looked away. Patients who recognized me from town gave me polite but strained smiles. I felt like every person had read the posts, seen the screenshots, heard the recordings. Theodore hadn't needed to raise his voice. He had let my own words destroy me. Adrian vanished completely. His texts slowed to nothing, and when I tried to call, he ignored me. I heard from someone else that he was already spending time with another woman at the gym, and the final thread of validation I had clung to snapped. I had risked everything for his attention, and he hadn't even cared enough to stay when the first sign of trouble came. The children sensed the change most of all. Emily asked why Daddy had files with my name on them, why she heard relatives whispering when they thought she wasn't listening. Noah asked why Daddy stayed calm when I shouted. I told them Daddy was being unfair, but their faces didn't soften. They didn't believe me anymore. They trusted his quiet steadiness more than my noise. One night, unable to hold it in, I confronted Theodore again. I told him he was ruining me, that he was turning everyone against me. He looked at me with that same calm stare and said it wasn't him, it was me. He told me every word, every joke, every late-night excuse had built this moment. He didn't have to twist anything. He only had to collect what I freely gave. Then he turned back to his laptop, typing steadily, while I stood there shaking with anger that had nowhere to land. That was when it hit me fully. I had thought fidelity was boring, that mocking it made me clever, that cheating made me powerful. But Theodore had been building something far stronger than I ever imagined. His silence was not weakness, it was a weapon, and with it, he had turned my own story into the very case that would undo me. The court hearing was the final stage of what Theodore had been quietly preparing for months. I walked in thinking I could still twist the story, that if I spoke with enough confidence, the judge would see me as the victim. I had practiced lines in my head, words that framed Theodore as controlling and old-fashioned, while I was simply honest and modern. But when I saw the stack of documents on his lawyer's table, my confidence began to drain. It wasn't just a folder, it was a tower of proof, carefully sorted, every page a piece of my own undoing. The judge started by asking for evidence, and Theodore's lawyer went through it step by step. My words from dinners and parties were typed out, witnesses confirming I had said fidelity was boring, that I had mocked Theodore in front of children and family. Screenshots of messages to Adrian appeared next, casual lines where I bragged that Theodore would never stop me, that he was too weak to do anything. Each message sounded worse read aloud than it had felt when I typed it. Then came photos and receipts, dinners, drinks, late nights disguised as work. Every detail was laid out in calm, clinical order. When it was my turn, I tried to explain that I was only joking, that everyone exaggerated in front of friends. I said Theodore was punishing me for being open, that I was brave enough to say what others hid. But my words felt thin in that room. No one laughed, no one nodded in agreement. The judge didn't look impressed. Theodore didn't even glance at me. He sat still, hands folded, letting the paper speak louder than I ever could. I tried to argue for the children, saying I was their mother and they needed me. But then the judge asked about stability. Theodore's lawyer produced school reports signed by him, records of parent-teacher meetings he attended alone, medical forms with his name on them. Teachers had written statements saying he was reliable, steady, and always present. I had nothing to counter it. My claim that I was the active parent crumbled in minutes. When custody was discussed, I felt my throat tighten. Theodore was granted primary custody, with me given limited, scheduled visits. The judge explained it was about providing a consistent environment, not punishment. But to me, it felt like punishment all the same. My children, who I believed would always default to me, were being taken from my daily life. I looked across the room, hoping to see doubt in their grandmother's eyes, or hesitation in my sister's face. But there was none. Karen sat upright, her expression firm with pride for her son. Marla sat with folded arms, looking at me with disappointment instead of support. The financial part came next. Theodore was granted temporary control over our accounts until the divorce finalized. My spending had been unpredictable, the lawyer said, while Theodore had proven steady with bills, savings, and planning. I tried to interrupt, saying he was cutting me off unfairly, but the judge silenced me. It was no longer about what I said, it was about what he had shown. When the decision was read aloud, I felt the weight of every word pressing down. Theodore didn't gloat. He didn't smile, didn't look triumphant. He simply gathered his papers, stood and thanked his lawyer. People in the room nodded at him with quiet respect as he walked out. No one looked at me. I sat frozen, clutching the documents I had been handed, my chest tight with disbelief. Outside the courthouse, the sight that cut deepest was Theodore walking down the steps, with Emily holding one hand and Noah holding the other. They leaned into him naturally, not looking back at me. Karen walked beside them, her head high, while Marla followed a step behind. They all looked like they belonged together. I stood alone on the steps, watching them walk away, realizing I had no one left on my side. I used to think his silence was emptiness, proof he had nothing to fight with. Now I understood it had been patience, a steady strength that didn't need noise. Every joke I made, every bold word, every careless message had been bricks he used to build a wall around himself and the children. And now that wall shut me out completely. Fidelity had been boring to me, but my own words, my own laughter, had become the very reason I lost everything. After the court ruling, the world around me changed in ways I hadn't expected. I thought maybe I could still spin things, still convince people that Theodore was cruel and I was misunderstood, but the truth was already cemented in everyone's mind. The documents, the evidence, the steady way he had carried himself, those things had spoken louder than any story I could try to tell. When I went to the clinic, the receptionist desk where I once thrived on gossip felt like a spotlight. Co-workers avoided conversation, whispering only when I turned away. Patients who recognized me gave me polite but distant smiles, and I knew what they were thinking. They had read the posts, seen the screenshots, heard the whispers. I wasn't bold anymore. I was the joke, the example of what happens when arrogance runs too far. Adrian, of course, was gone. He stopped replying completely, vanishing like smoke the moment the consequences arrived. I heard through someone at the gym that he was already spending time with someone new, and I realized just how little I had meant to him. I had risked everything for the thrill of attention from a man who couldn't even stand by me when things got hard. The validation that once made me feel alive now felt like poison, because it had led me straight into ruin. My sister Marla answered less and less. When I finally reached her, she said she loved me, but couldn't keep defending me when the children were suffering. She reminded me of the times she had warned me, the times she told me to stop pushing Theodore so far. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She had been my cheerleader once, but now even she was standing on the other side. Karen, my mother-in-law, didn't hold back either. She told me plainly that her son had finally proven himself, and that I had no one to blame but myself. I wanted to scream at her, but the truth was I couldn't argue. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it had come. The children were the deepest cut. During visitation, Emily was polite but distant. She spoke about school, about her friends, but always with caution, as if measuring every word. She looked at me like she didn't fully trust me anymore, and I hated that. Noah clung to Theodore during exchanges, his small hands tight around his father's, and when I tried to hug him longer, he pulled away. Their faces held no anger, just confusion, and that confusion was worse. It meant they were already adjusting to a new reality where I wasn't central anymore. The apartment I moved into felt like punishment on its own. Small, quiet, stripped of the life I once thought I controlled. No laughter, no stage, no audience, just silence, heavy and sharp. I used to think silence was weakness, but now it was mine, and it was unbearable. I replayed the moments over and over in my head, the dinners, the barbecues, the times I had mocked Theodore while people laughed. I thought those moments had given me power, but in truth, they had handed him all the proof he needed. I tried one last time to twist the story online, posting that Theodore had betrayed me, that he was controlling and cruel, but the comments came back cold. People reminded me that I had said Fidelity was boring, that I had laughed about humiliating my husband. They didn't see me as brave anymore. They saw me as reckless. The same audience that once fed my ego now turned their backs. Theodore never gloated, never sent me messages rubbing it in, never stood in front of me with victory in his eyes. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. He had his dignity, his children, his stability. And I had nothing left but the echo of my own words. The last time I saw him, he was walking away from me after a visitation exchange. Emily held his hand on one side, Noah on the other, and they both leaned toward him, their small voices chattering as if the world had always been that way. He looked calm, steady, untouchable. I stood behind them, clutching my empty bag, watching them go. That was when I finally understood that the silence I once mocked had become the strongest voice of all. Fidelity had bored me, or so I said, but what truly destroyed me wasn't fidelity. It was the arrogance that made me laugh at it, the arrogance that believed words had no weight. Theodore had shown me just how heavy words could be when written down, recorded, and read aloud in a courtroom. And now those same words were the reason I was left standing alone. The weeks after the court decision stretched into something I could only describe as exile. It wasn't just losing the house, or the money, or even the children's daily presents. It was the way every layer of my life peeled away, leaving me exposed. I used to walk into a room and own it with my sharp jokes and bold opinions. Now, when I entered the clinic or even the corner cafe, I felt conversations drop. People looked up, hesitated, then quickly turned away, as though being caught talking to me might taint them too. I had always thought attention, even scandalous attention, was power. But this wasn't the kind I could twist into a story. This was avoidance, dismissal, pity. I tried reaching out to Adrian again, desperate to feel even a flicker of the thrill that once made me believe I was alive. But his silence was absolute. No replies, no calls returned. I saw online that he was already parading someone else at his gym, grinning in photos like he had never even known me. That betrayal bit harder than I wanted to admit, because it stripped away the last illusion I had, that at least my rebellion had been for something real. It hadn't. It was just for a man who found me entertaining until I became inconvenient. Marla's distance stung differently. She wasn't cruel, not like Karen, who openly told me I deserved what came. Marla simply stopped showing up, stopped answering in anything more than short texts. When I begged her to tell me she was still on my side, she said she couldn't keep pretending. She said the children were the ones who mattered, and Theodore had shown he could give them stability. Her words replayed in my head for days, because Marla had once been my biggest supporter. If she couldn't believe in me anymore, then who could? Even my parents, who usually avoided conflict, pulled back. My mother called once, hesitantly, and told me she wished I had handled things differently. She didn't scold, didn't condemn, but I could hear the embarrassment in her voice. It wasn't anger that hurt, it was shame. They didn't know how to explain me to family friends anymore. That realization cut deeper than any lecture. The children were the sharpest wound of all. Emily came to one visit with her backpack stuffed with homework, telling me she needed to keep busy. She used to chatter endlessly to me, but now she spoke in short bursts, careful and cautious, glancing at the clock to see how much longer until she went back to Theodore. Noah clung to Theodore at drop-offs, crying when it was time to let go of his father's hand. I tried to comfort him, but he only grew quiet in my arms. Their distance was worse than their father's silence. It wasn't punishment, it was protection. They were learning to shield themselves from me. The apartment felt like a cage. I sat there some nights replaying the noise of the past, laughter at dinners, whispers at parties, the applause I thought I earned when I mocked Theodore. I thought I had been fearless. Now I saw I had only been reckless. Theodore hadn't needed to say much. He let my own words build the case, brick by brick, until the wall around him was too strong for me to break. At work, my manager called me into the office. He said politely that my situation had become a distraction. He didn't fire me, but the implication was clear. My presence was making people uncomfortable, my name too heavy with scandal. Even the job I used as an escape was slipping. I'd always thought I could talk my way out of anything, but no one wanted to hear my voice anymore. Theodore, meanwhile, carried on with a steadiness I had never respected until it was too late. He took the children to school, to activities, to family gatherings. People spoke of him with admiration now, saying he had handled everything with dignity. He never gloated, never flaunted his victory, but that made it sting even more. He didn't need to humiliate me. I had done that to myself. The last time I saw him, he was leaving the courthouse after a follow-up hearing. Emily held one of his hands, Noah the other. Their small faces lit up as they told him about their day. Karen walked beside them, her head held high, her pride in her son plain for all to see. I stood off to the side, clutching the papers that spelled out my limited visitation, watching them walk away. No one looked back at me. Not Theodore, not the children, not even Marla, who followed a few steps behind them. It was in that moment I finally understood what I had lost. I used to joke that Fidelity was boring, that silence was weakness, that I was too clever to ever be caged by rules. But now Fidelity was what made Theodore strong. Silence was what gave him power. And my own cleverness had left me standing alone. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching.